مصلحا ومجددا فارنوا بنظر طاهر وجنان.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. Recently, Mohammed Hijab and Dilly Hussain did a podcast. In this podcast, they discussed Takfirism and said that it is strange that nowadays many Muslims believe that Takfir leads to terrorism and violence, and they confuse the concept of Takfir of an individual with the Takfir done by groups like ISIS. And they say that many Muslims think that doing Takfir is, in other words, promoting violence against an individual or group. We agree with them. Not every type of takfir leads to terrorism or violence. However, the brothers need to understand which takfir leads to violence and terrorism. And one example of that is the takfir done by the Muslim mullahs in Pakistan. The takfir done against Ahmadi Muslims, which was mentioned by these brothers, does lead to violence and terrorism. And the reason for this is that the mullahs not only say that Ahmadi Muslims are disbelievers and outside the fold of Islam, but they try to force Ahmadi Muslims to live like disbelievers and take away our rights to live like Muslims. Such takfir leads to terrorism and violence, and these brothers must speak up against such terrorism. Other Muslim scholars should also speak against such takfir, which is, in other words, terrorism and violence, and contradicts the Quran and Sunnah of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam.
I think what's happened is, Akhi, that because of the ISIS situation, ISIS and Takfiri movements, people have been reluctant to make Takfir at a level that is probably unprecedented in history.
Yeah, it was ISIS, but ISIS Syria 2014,
because they don't want to be linked
16,
with that.
yeah.
They know that people link Takfirism and they link, or Takfir in general, with Takfirism, or Takfirism and violence.
But there's also the incident where a Qadiani shopkeeper was killed by someone because the person who killed him professed their love for Rasulullah. Did you hear about this incident?
No.
Yeah, so there was a Qadiani or Ahmadi shopkeeper who was killed, and the person who killed him wrote a letter, and he identified as a Sunni. Obviously, we had the murder of the MP Joe Cox. We had the by a far right individual. We had the murder of David Arness by a person who identified as a Muslim.
Yes.
So I think the concerns are coming from there.
All right, so let's make this very clear. Making takfir of someone, okay, and like, for example, my takfir of Hamza Yusuf is absolutely not a call to violence. In fact, we would consider someone doing violence to this person to be a sinful act in and of itself because of the detriments, the societal detriments it would have, and because no one's a qadi here, no one's a judge during execution. We're living in the West, you know.
Alhamdulillah, Muhammad Hijab, you have accepted that such takfir is a sin. However, are you brave enough to openly call out the Muslim scholars of Pakistan for treating Ahmadi Muslims in this way, where they try to force us to live like non-Muslims and on top of that attack us while we worship Allah the Almighty? Are you brave enough to call them out for such takfir, which is leading to terrorism and putting the lives of Ahmadi Muslims at risk?
The first question amongst them is, there are many Pakistani Muslims who believe that it is wrong to call any Muslim as a non-Muslim. But what can they do in the present situation of Pakistan to establish peace in the country? This is from Munira Khalil of Birmingham.
You see, first of all, let me clarify that I have no objection against anybody calling anybody non-Muslim, considering him to be non-Muslim. Because if I take that right from him or her, it would be interfering with his fundamental human right. If somebody is brought up in a manner of religious training where he thinks that there are certain fundamentals to that religion, which if missing in another person, a follower of another sect, would give him the message that because that fundamental is not present in his concept of Allah and Rasul, so he cannot be genuinely defined as Muslim. Can it happen or not? It can happen genuinely. So how can one take the right away from everybody, that even if he considers somebody to be not genuine Muslim, he should, for the sake of unity, go on calling him a genuine Muslim? It's not right. The objectionable point is a completely different thing from this. If you consider somebody to be a Muslim, you have a right to consider him as non-Muslim, but you have no right to force him to call himself a non-Muslim. Because the same principle of fundamental human right would be violated then. Christians have been calling others as non-Christians, but they have never in history snatched the right from each other to still continue to call themselves Christians. What is happening in Pakistan is the most distorted thing in religious history. They consider us to be non-Muslims, Ahmadis, while they have been considering each other non-Muslims for last 1300 years. At least 100 years after, even before, Hazrat Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, closer to him than 1300 years, there are sects in Islam who have been considering others as not Muslims. But as such, they continue to disagree with each other. Never they imposed this compulsion on any sect they considered non-Muslim as not to behave like a Muslim, not to act as a Muslim, not to call themselves as Muslims, and not to do anything by way of Muslim worship which would make them appear like Muslims. This never happened in any religion in the world before, and even in Islam before the time of these recent decisions of government of Pakistan vis-a-vis Ahmadiyya. No, what they are doing is this: we are a majority, a political majority, and democratically we have a right to vote you down, to consider you anything, and this is a democratic right of the people. So it's not a question of interference in religion. This is a question only an exercise of a democratic right. This is what the ambassador of Pakistan here wrote in answer to a letter of protest by a British MP as to why these things are happening to Ahmadiyyat, and the same answer was given in Canada and in other places of the world. So it was a well, tailored answer supplied to all the ambassadors. But if you study it further, there is no, iota of wisdom in that answer. The fact is that, first of all, democracy is democracy and religion is religion, and never the twain shall meet. And when they do, they create disorder. This is supported by the world history. As long as they remain separate, there is peace. When religion and democracy or politics join hands, they create havoc for the peace of mankind. Because the politician can, of course, be cruel to their own people, but in their own name. But when cruelties are perpetrated against others in the name of God, then human beings begin to play God, and they have the support of a political system behind them. Then what happens? A Khomeini is born, a Zia is born, and Inquisition begins to take root in Spain, and so on and so forth. This is a murderous mistake. And in this respect, politics must be kept aloof and separate from religious domain, and they should not interfere with each other. Secondly, to see anybody to be something. For instance, they have declared us to be non-Muslims. Okay. Can a democracy declare somebody to be a dog? A human being to be a dog? They say, yes, why not? We have a right, we have a majority. All right, you declare a human being to be a dog, but can democracy force that human dog to bark? How can they teach that human being to act like a dog and behave like a dog, and the moment they start, that human being behaves like a human being, he is penalized, he is punished, because he has broken the law, democratic law. Is there any wisdom in that? This is exactly what is taking place against Ahmadiyya. They say we have a human right, a democratic right, to consider yourself to be outside the pale of Islam. We say, yet we have that same democratic right to consider ourselves to be within the pale of Islam. So that is the stalemate. No more. You call us non-Muslims, we call ourselves Muslims, that's all. When you declare something against a minority political party, you cannot force that political party to agree with you and start acting like you believe they are. Only the democratic majority has a right to legislate as they please, but they cannot change the nature of the political parties who are in opposition. For instance, if there is, consider a Labour Party for instance, and there is a majority government of conservatives. If they declare that we democratically think that you are not Labour, you are a communist party, what can that poor minority do in a democratic state? They say, all right, do whatever you please, but this is nonsense. They say, no, no, it's not just nonsense. We are going to legislate now that if any member of Labour Party acts like a member of Labour Party from now on, he will be punishable to 3 years rigorous imprisonment. From now on, because we consider him to be a member of Communist Party, every member of the Labour Party must start acting as a communist. Can this happen in democracy? This is what is happening in the so-called Pakistani democracy. They declare Ahmadis to be non-Muslims and they want us to act as non-Muslims. We say that will not happen. Do whatever you may. You can call us dogs, whatever name you give us. All right, we'll tolerate that. But if you expect us to behave like you think we are, that's not going to happen. This is the problem which is now being dealt forcibly by the enforcement of laws and penal codes, etc., against Ahmadis. Thousands of Ahmadis are facing charges which may lead to their imprisonment to 3 years, rigorous imprisonment or more, or may lead to their condemnation to death. Because the law now interprets the legislation against Ahmadis in the sense that if an Ahmadi declares La ilaha illallahu Muhammadur Rasulullah, which means there is no God but Allah, and Muhammad is his prophet, according to the the Chief Justice of High Court of Pakistan, if an Ahmadi says that, it must be taken as an insult to the Holy Prophet of Islam. And as such, he must be condemned to death. These statements are published statements, they are public knowledge now. No country in the West raised their little finger against this. But when the death penalty hung over 2 Christian boys, then the entire world conscience was aroused. And right from Europe to America to Canada, the publicity was given to this, and they said, they immediately, offered them asylums, and they were removed from their country under influence, American influence, etc. and they're still at it. The two boys, Christian boys, against whom the same law created the threat of death, they have been noticed by the West, but Ahmadis who are treated in large numbers like this, they're completely ignored. So that is the unfortunate situation in the world.
If you have not yet subscribed, make sure to subscribe and click on the bell icon so you can get notifications for every new video. Also make sure to like and comment on the video and follow on Twitter and Instagram.
سيدنا صل على محمد